Welcome to Full PreFrontal, the show that exposes the mysteries of executive function. This podcast is a collection of conversations about the role of the prefrontal cortex, which impacts your focus, planning, problem-solving, emotional balance, and independence. So join us as we explore executive function and the science of learning. And now, here's your host, the founder of EXQ, Sucheta Kamath.
Welcome to another episode of Full PreFrontal. My mission is to help people understand that their brain's prefrontal cortex, at its best, acts as an orchestra conductor, directing actions, guiding emotions, tweaking responses, and calibrating decisions in order to create a beautiful, harmonious symphony of a well-lived life. And I bring guests who contribute to this process of uncovering the key components that drive and propel this fundamental new brain or neocortex into self-regulation. Each guest brings their unique perspective and their expertise to help promote the growth and development of this unique cerebral system that is designed to collaborate, communicate, and connect. And it's my great pleasure to re-invite. I hope he didn't mind my imposition, but he has been on our podcast before and he's graciously accepted to come back. It's my great privilege and honor to welcome you, George McCloskey.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Appreciate it.
You are a professor and director of psychology research in the School of Professional and Applied Psychology of the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and holds Diplomate status with the American Academy of Pediatric Neuropsychology. He has amassed 40 years of experience in test development, teaching, research and assessment, and intervention with a wide range of clients, has developed a comprehensive model of executive functions, and he is kind of a leading expert in how to conceptualize these ideas and how to actually apply them to everyday life, when particularly clinicians when they're working with clients, but also general philosophy with which he operates is very close to my heart. So it's a great pleasure to be with you.
It's a real pleasure to be here with you as well. Always a lot of fun to talk about these topics, definitely.
Truly. So, executive function skills are a set of mental skills used to manage our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors to achieve goals that are designed by self for self. And my question is, today I wanted to kind of take the time to really talk about lifelong implications of executive function. Now that enough research has been focused in this particular domain, we understand the ramifications. Particularly, I wanted to share this research study by Moffitt and group that talked about like 32 years later, they followed children from age 2, I think, for 32 years, and they found that self-control in childhood was directly related to better jobs, higher income, better health, stronger relationships, fewer run-ins with the law, prevention of teenage pregnancies, higher graduation rate. So let's dive in. How do you think about executive function when you think about at a global scale, and not from like in our little offices when we are dealing with clients or patients?
Well, I think it's we talk about frontal lobe functions in general. I think executive functions are a specific subclass of frontal lobe functions that really tie in with Daniel Kahneman's thinking of system 1 and system 2 thinking. And system 2 thinking is conscious, effortful, self-reflective, self-aware. And that's more what we're talking about here when we talk about executive functions, the ability to become consciously aware of what you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing it, so you can self-regulate more effectively. That's how I think of executive capacities. You think about our birth and the process of frontal lobe development and developing executive functions over time. When we started thinking about human development and how people develop, and we didn't have this concept of frontal lobe functions or brain development in mind. So a lot of the constructs and concepts in psychology that we've developed over the years, and other fields too, have really been developed without thinking about the brain. Now that we know about frontal lobe functions and how they're involved, we can rethink a lot of things. For example, we know that we are born with certain temperamental presets. Scientific research says there are temperamental presets, and some of them are better than others. But then there's this idea that temperament morphs into personality, and that once you have your personality, it's essentially, immutable or unchangeable. And of course, that's some conventional knowledge, that wisdom has kind of been debunked. But I tend to think of it this way: as you're born with a temperamental set. When you're born, though, your frontal lobe begins to develop. And as it develops, it interacts with the environment. So over time, interacting with the environment, your frontal lobe produces what we call a pattern of behaviors or patterns of perceptions, feeling, thoughts, and actions that could be self-directed, could be under executive control awareness. So that essentially all the things that we do are simply external projections of our frontal lobe functions. And so personality is that external projection of what your frontal lobes have learned how to do to that point in time. And if you don't, you're maybe more of the temperamental set, but as your frontal lobe interacts with the environment, you can change that temperamental set, because it's not getting you what you want. It's not helping you be adaptive, or maybe it's helping you be very adaptive. So you emphasize it. So there are choices here that brains can make as they develop, and that frontal lobes can assist you in creating that way of accessing who you want to be and who you want to become. But if you don't believe that, then you think you're just being influenced by all these forces, and it's just personality. It's just who I am. It's my temperament. She was a difficult baby. She was a difficult child. Why do you think she'd be anything but a difficult adult? And so it's that temperament morphs into personality. But of course, what we know from people like Walter Mischel, who wrote the Marshmallow Test, the book, right, and studied self-regulation in 4-year-olds. He said, with 40 years in the field of personality research, one thing I can tell you is personality is not immutable or unchangeable. It changes all the time. And so once you realize that and open the door for the possibilities of change, no matter what age you are, you say, well, how do you change? And the answer is you change by changing your frontal lobe function. You change by taking control through executive control, consciously developing the capacity to become aware and understand what you're doing, what you aren't doing, and how you could self-regulate differently. But that requires those upper levels of executive control we've talked about: self-determination, goal setting, self-realization, realizing who you are, what you can do well or not, what you need to do to change, self-generativity, morals and ethics. Right. So these are things, these are all frontal lobe functions that we can, that will develop, system one thinking. There's moral choice that's happening in a brain. Are you aware of the moral choices you're making? That's system two thinking. That's executive control. Frontal lobe functions that enable us to take control of that process are different than just frontal lobe functions that operate.
Let's take a pause here and kind of dive deep into a couple of things you're saying, which are so profound and really meaningful for anybody who wants to either promote the development of executive function or is in business of supporting the development of somebody else's executive function. So what I'm really loving is this idea that the brain and environment exchange interactions, and how mostly the brain is changing or getting reshaped or is responding differently based on the environmental demands or based on environmental pushback or not cooperating environment. And that is that adaptive flexibility. So let's talk about the delay in developing these skills. Certain prefrontal systems are not wired to adapt quickly enough, so that they have greater setbacks. So for example, a child who doesn't get a cookie and throws a tantrum, and then the mom can't stand to see the child crying, so she gives in and gives the cookie. So now the child can learn to cry loudly so that he gets the cookie, or mom can tolerate the crying a little bit longer, and the child continues to cry but doesn't get the cookie and says, okay, well, maybe I can do something else. So there's different ways things can go, but some brains are more wired to hang back or tolerate the pain. And I was reading somewhere this work about executive function, time management, procrastination. And I read this great sentence that said, all time management is pain management. So if you look at all goal attainment, our failure to attain goals is all about managing the pain of not getting to the goal fast enough, right? And some
Okay.
people are able to some people are able to push that goal, keep the goal, but push through the obstacles. Some people just give up the goal and move to a new goal. So what are your thoughts about that ability to shape the environment, and some people or the some people meeting the barriers or failures immediately kind of give in or not do that?
Yeah. Well, I think that, when I say the frontal lobe interacts with the environment, part of that environment is the most important is our relationship with others, and it starts with attachment. And, especially to mother and father, the attachments, but also then the modeling and the shaping and the behaviors that occur, the interchanges between the child and the parents in terms of shaping that frontal lobe. There's a lot of very basic behavior management here, because for younger brains, they are not making their own decisions. They're being guided through that process. So it's a stage of external control. It's that stage where we're helping a frontal lobe develop and learn what are the best strategies for it to use to have positive outcomes. But we're helping it learn that and teach it that, and we're shaping it in very important ways. Consistency being so important, right? We know that if it's important for a behavior not to occur, then when that behavior occurs, then you take immediate action. You can give the warning. First warning, second warning. If I go to 3, this is what will happen. 3 comes, you must do it. Age 2, putting peas up their nose at dinner, out at a restaurant, right? If you do that again, don't do that again. This is your first warning. That's second warning. Don't do that. If you do that again, we will leave the restaurant. My food comes. The child at age 2 makes this calculation in his brain. Dad's food just came. He won't do anything about this. Pea goes in the nose. We leave the restaurant. So lesson learned. In other words, don't mess with dad. Consistency is important. If I say this is going to happen, it will happen. There's nothing more important to me than helping you learn what you need to learn, not even my food. So that food will be left at the table and we will leave the restaurant. And some parents won't. See, then they'll go, well, and now we got this variable ratio reinforcement where sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. So now you just keep pushing, and you've got a kid who's going to push the limits as much as they can. And very often you give in, and where's this end? So there's a lot of very basic behavior management that parents do have to employ in those younger years to help assist a frontal lobe, get that structure necessary to begin that real learning process. But also then there's, through that process, it's helping them see the possibilities of how they can make choices, and how, giving them the opportunity to make choices, not simply to be always externally controlling them, but to start pulling back and allow them to take those chances and learn from their mistakes, but also help them shape how to react to those mistakes. And just, it's a gradual process of letting go of being their frontal lobe and allowing them to be their own frontal lobe. And by age 10, that has to happen, because the frontal lobe is just, it's its own brain, whether you like it or not. But up to that point, we have a lot of influence on it. And the modeling and shaping is so important in how you do it. And we know from studies like the things that I'm losing, my word finding difficulties these days are getting more pronounced. But I'm thinking of the author of Blink.
Oh, Malcolm Gladwell?
Malcolm Gladwell discussed in several of his discussions in his books how this process of how parents interact with children shapes how the children begin to interact with the world, and how much agency they take in the world, and how much do parents leave it up to their children to make decisions, to talk for themselves when they go to the doctors. Just those little subtle things that we begin to do that enable that shift to start occurring, where we're relying on your frontal lobe to develop and grow. Reflective questioning.
And to your point,
what should I do? What do you think you should do? Just simple questions. Yeah.
And to your point, research shows that executive function skills are more important for school readiness than our IQ or entry level reading or math in kindergarten. And
much more
that requires 2 primary skills: impulse control and ability to follow instructions. And so can you talk a little bit about these 2 particular skills in early age? And we can walk through implications like that. But it's so profound, yet completely misunderstood is this capacity to follow instructions.
Mm,
That has all the underlying skills of executive function, focus,
it
working
does.
memory, ability to conceptually create some kind of a roadmap of execution, organization and planning of thoughts. When, like, don't open the window if the door is closed, requires you to restructure, look at the door first, then look at the window. You know what I mean? So talk a
Sure.
little bit about these in the beginning stages of kindergarten, how that matters.
Well, I think some things that stymie parents and sometimes even teachers and professionals is that there seems to be this idea. You say, well, he can't follow the instructions, and it's this mindset of they either can follow instructions or they can't. And we don't think of it as a process that needs to be learned. It's a skill. Following instructions is a skill that you learn. So how about we teach you how to follow instructions, but how about we do it in a fun way, so that we get your brain to start doing it a lot. And now it's really easy to do it, but you had a lot of fun while you were doing it. So
Mm.
playing Simon Says, just playing basic games, freeze tag, other kinds of games that teach brains to follow instructions. The more you do it, the better at it you get. These are neurons in the brain that need to strengthen and grow and develop. And the more they fire together, the more they wire together. And you're getting those brains to work together in an integrated way, the way you want them to do that thing called following instructions. And the more they do it, the better, and the more feedback you get about how well you did it. And so structuring it as a game like that and you get lots of practice and rehearsal and lots of feedback in a game. Some very simple things and techniques that can be done in curriculums like Tools of the Mind that do this with 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, to simply begin to strengthen those basic skills that we think brains need in order to become self-regulated, and they do need them. And it's not enough to simply tell the brain, do this. You need to do this more. You need to show it how to do it. And then we see that transfer from, if you can do it in the game, when I ask you to do it over here, it usually follows that the brain can now do that. But it needs that the underutilization of neural networks is a problem. If you don't do it much, you're not doing it, which means your neurons aren't firing in the right pattern. So you're underutilizing the capacity that's in your brain. It's not that you have a developmental delay, it's that you haven't done this much. And so children come to school at age 4, not having been asked to do a lot of the things that we want them to do now to self-regulate. And it's a matter of helping them catch up in the sense of getting them to do it more in the first few months of school, so that those neurons that are undeveloped, underutilized, can start being used more effectively, start grow and strengthen, and start those connections that leads to just basic. Appreciate that if you learn how to do this at age 4, 5, 6, 7, by the time you're 8 or 9, it's automatic. You don't have to think. You don't have to be consciously aware of how to do these things, how to inhibit impulse responding, how to pay attention. Your brain is so good at it, it can just do it. Now you can focus on when should you be doing it, that executive function piece. But the skill piece can be automated. If it's not, and you don't even know how to do it, then we have to teach you how to do it. And some children at age 8 haven't learned how yet. And
I love what
it's our job to do it, right? Teach them how to do it.
Yes, and I really love the nuance that you pointed out here, that following directions is a skill. It is not something inherent to being a human. It is something that
It's not natural.
No, it's not natural. And yet it's a marriage between that respect that you have for the person, and love and respect maybe, but also I like to call them as joint goals. In younger years, that one of the responsibilities that parents have, as well as educators have, is to help children appreciate that your job is to cooperate. That is your job. And your entire premise of your early development is cooperation. You have no other goals. Eating candy may be a secondary goal, but cooperate is a primary goal. So in effort to cooperate, you need to follow instructions. I am not the boss of you. I am not owning you, but by you following me, you are going to learn and develop, but you have only one goal. Your goal is to not follow my directions. Your goal is to cooperate with me. And I think if you define it that way, then you can actually not hyper-focus on failure to follow instructions, but you can see that I cannot cooperate because I don't know how. It's a different language now than you're not following directions, than getting the child in trouble for behaviors.
Well, it's very profound. I really, and the thing that you said that is so riveting in that is that idea that children often want to do it because they love and respect you. And I have seen so many rifts between parent and child when in fact that's absolutely the case. The child does love and respect their parent, but the parent is not getting what they expect from the child. And they're assuming that that means you don't love me or you don't respect me. But it's simply a matter they don't know how.
They don't know how.
And that's and it's such an important piece, because the love and respect can often enable a brain to power through in some situation, and you will see what you're looking for. But in other situations, it's not going to happen if the brain doesn't know how. And that child is not conscious enough to be able to say to you, I just don't know how to do that. It's just going to come out in different ways. They're going to act silly. They're going to avoid you. They're just going to do, and you're just going to go, what's going on here, right? And when they become adolescents, they're going to do all kinds of things to throw you off the trail, because the last thing they want to do is admit, I don't know how to do that. And it just becomes, and there's just gigantic communication rift that develops because of that inability to just step back and go, you know what? I don't think you know how to do that, And it's just like, I guess I need to teach that, or find someone who knows how to teach it. Look, so we don't always know everything to teach or how to teach it, but if you at least know what that problem is, you can find the solution.
I love that. So let's talk about the second implication I often see is that research shows that executive function skill alone predicts both math and reading competence throughout the school years, from kindergarten to graduation from high school. And it's not a particular, math class. It's not science ability. It's not language arts ability. It's the executive function, which is your ability to manage your learning and your ability to fulfill expectations others have of you, which is a way of measuring how well you understood and learned something. So talk to that. What is your experience about this particular implication that has profound impact on graduation? Mm-hmm. From high school?
Well, yeah, and I think if you just think about the different self-regulation capacities and how they develop through the elementary, middle, and high school years, here's your reading, here's your math. But if you're able to pay attention and sustain attention as long as you need to, it's probably going to benefit both of those, isn't it? If you are able to inhibit impulsive responding, to be able to shift, be flexible when you're thinking, discontinue ongoing activity when necessary, you're probably going to do better in math and reading. If you can find your errors and correct them, if you can monitor yourself to make sure you find them, if you can monitor yourself to make sure you're paying attention when you need to, if you can find the right balance in all the things that you do, if you can learn that you have a memory system and learn how to use it and manage it, and you can learn how to plan and organize and make decisions and generate solutions, wouldn't all of those things benefit your reading and your math? And so we realized there's these aspects that develop that are not part of the curriculum in terms of content or subject area, but they're a hidden curriculum. We expect you to be able to do more of these as you go through school, and yet we don't teach them. We don't tell you about them. We just notice that, in fact, if you have them, you do better in reading or math. Isn't that interesting, right? The best students do seem to have really good executive functions. In fact, we ask parents and teachers to rate students' executive functions and also to rate them on how good a student they think they are. It's no surprise that the students that parents and teachers rate as being very good students have the highest executive function ratings. And students that are rated by their parents and teachers as not very good students have extremely poor executive functions, or are rated as having poor executive functions, because they go together in adults' minds. But what they don't see is that they don't just naturally grow together, and you don't develop self-regulation simply because you're learning how to read or how to write or how to do math. But if you do learn how to self-regulate, you'll be able to do all those other things so much better.
You know what, another important point that you're making about this is that in order to know, in order to do well, let's say, in math, the best way rather others know I'm doing well in math is when I'm tested. And the best way I can show what I know is to apply my understanding on paper to produce. But to show what you know is executive function. And let's say I'm really good at doing math in my head, but I don't show my math work, I'm losing points. So now I'm looking that I have math trouble, but in fact, I don't have math trouble. I have not that difficulty knowing how to show that I can do math in the head and I can do math on paper just for you. So that requires the student to adjust output based on the demand, going back to these following instructions. And I feel following instructions is the most critical executive function, or is like the telling sign of somebody having good executive function skills. Is if you ask any educator, how well does this student follow directions? And they're like, nah, I asked him to choose one of the three topics and he chose something on his own that was not even listed as a topic. He wrote a paper, but it wasn't even something I asked. I'll tell you one funny story that when recently in my trips to India, Indian environment also becomes, academic environment has become extremely competitive. So the kids are getting tutored after school in individual subjects. So imagine the kid is in school for 8 hours, comes home, and in India they call it tuition. So every kid, in order to perform well on formal tests, they are getting tutored for another 4 hours every day.
Yes, it's the general education model in Japan. To come home and go to school for 4 more hours.
Yes. Oh, okay.
That's the norm. That's the norm.
You're familiar with that. And what's so fascinating to me that by doing that, so one difference between American education and Indian education, since I was born and raised there, a lot of there's an incredible pressure to respect education, whether you like it or not, on the educational process. And that seems to be an avenue to get a break from life. And in America, there's a lot of like my parents would have freaked out if I had said, I'm going to take a little sabbatical. I'm going to take a year off. They would have chopped my head off. But I think what I found that for some kids, this tutoring was in fact filtering information by somebody else who's doing one-on-one training so that they don't have to follow directions. They were removing all the executive function demands from that student that impeded that student's ability to comprehend so that they understood information better and then they could perform better. But that's not life-sustaining. That's like having no life. But
right.
What do you think about this approach?
It's still a very heavy form of external control. It's a very heavy form of external control. It really is. And there's lots of things in there that you discuss, and one of the largest ones being motivation and the connection of motivation to self-regulation. Lots of connections there going both ways in the brain. When you will use your self-regulation I'll see you at your best when you're doing something you like. Yes. So students that say, here are the 4 things you want me to write about, but I don't want to write about any of those. This is what I'd like to write about. At least they wrote something for you. So for me, like, we're getting you in the right direction, right? You're at least producing. Now I need to get you to understand that in certain situations, it's not going to be about what you want to produce. It's going to be about what you're being asked to produce on demand by others. Otherwise, you could lose your job. You could, get demoted on your grades, whatever the case may be. There will be consequences. But sometimes that connection with motivation, if you don't first establish it, we never get in the door with those students. So sometimes modifying our demands to enable them to be motivated and enable them to self-regulate. So because they're motivated and get something done is step 1. Now let's modify that so that you can respond to external demands and bring those, because that's internal demand system, right? That's the internal command versus external demand or internal desire. And when you desire things, boy, your self-regulation, I'm on it. You know it, right? Of course, it can lead to addictions too. And you can get very good with your self-regulation at getting more of that substance you want and hiding it from everyone. So many individuals with substance use disorders aren't completely devoid of executive control or self-regulation. It's that they're using it in service of a lower motivation, self-gratification system that's motivating them. And now it's hijacked their frontal lobes and they're responding to it. And that's what's calling the shots. And of course, motivational interviewing techniques, detox, then motivational interviewing to disconnect from that immediate gratification and reconnect to delayed gratification and pull yourself toward goals, that are not just those things that are fun and you like to do. But that's a process of learning how to abandon that immediate gratification desire, because I can get that self-regulation charge from that I'm looking for, and find ways to get that self-regulation charge from yourself to meet goals that are in the future. That will serve you well. And parents' answer to that is just listen to me. School's important. Don't you dare try not to go, not to do it. And you know, it's
Threats.
like, no, you understand. We're taking over till 25. Then you can make your own decisions after that. You know, you have the frontal lobe to do it, but we're not going to trust you till then. And the reality is, after the age 10, the brain is its own machine, you know, its own boss, and it's listening to those things the parents are saying. It's considering them to some degree. Some brains are good at considering that, listening, but others just tune it out and do whatever they feel like doing. And then there's a lot of difficulty in that. And sometimes how that's handled produces more pain and strife for the family, accepting the fact that this brain is not just going to buy the standard, you do it or else. It's really important. So get on board, and you need to connect with that individual to find out what is motivating you and what is it that you think is so important that you should pursue if it's not education. And if you pursued that, would it really turn out okay? Are you sure? In other words, those persistent dialogues over time that help the brain through iterations kind of develop a more sophisticated sense of self-determination. It's more realistic about what the future holds and what the world is like than these things they're thinking about at age 10 to 14, right? Or even into 25, that just probably won't lead anywhere. But we have to help them with that process. It's not sort of like, you know, just listen to us until you're 25.
Yeah.
Because most brains don't want to do that.
Because I mean, the next lifelong implications are failures that you were just talking about, not transferring agency from a child, from parents to child, or from educators to child, is what average graduation rate has expanded to 6 years now, or at least 5 years. And second thing is, poor executive function skills lead to poor productivity, difficulty in finding jobs, and then keeping them. So it's such a profound thing to remember that, yeah, maybe you can get the kid graduated. I mean, I guess what I was reading somewhere that a college degree now is equivalent to high school degree 40 years ago. So it's really not going to guarantee any type of a ladder, or you're not going to be on the third rung of the ladder simply because you graduated from college.
Yeah, I think that's there's a lot of truth to that. That there's a degree of education that we are forcing individuals to go through to be at the minimum level of acceptance to get in the door to some jobs. But at the same time, there are studies that, you know, came out of Harvard a few years ago about you really need to think about this college thing, because it's an investment in a lot of money that doesn't always pay off. Because some of those jobs that you get in the door on are never going to pay back what you just spent. And also, there are many things that people do. We are 40 plumbers down in Berks County here where I live. There are not enough there, which you call a plumber to come and fix your, right? You got to wait a long time. And I was talking to, you know, our plumber, and he said, yeah, there's people just not going into training. This is good money. This is a stable job that will never go away. And there are jobs out there. And the problem is that we do not give to those jobs the dignity that they deserve. We are now beginning to understand what it means to be an essential worker, like the people that bag groceries and do things, you know, at grocery stores that some people don't give a second thought. But here's the thing. Those are essential jobs. They need to be done because people need food, and the system needs to deliver food to people in, you know, in certain ways. You think there's all kinds of jobs you can do. We need to restore dignity to work, not dignity to college education. Exactly. And one of the most disappointing things was for me to hear a president several years ago say, you know, college is the ticket. Everyone should go to college. No, everyone shouldn't go to college. In fact, you know what the graduation rate is for college right now?
What?
In the United States, 29%.
Oh my God.
29% of Americans hold college degrees. 4-year degrees are better. 40% try, 29% succeed. So, and you'd think it was much higher the way we talk about college, that it's this thing you have to have or you're no one. And see, that's a problem. When we communicate that way to people, it starts a riff, and it begins this concept of elitism. And it's kind of led to some of the things that we see today. But the idea of, you know, it's not about whether you're college educated. It's about, what do you want to do? What do you have to do to get there? And, you know, now there are multiple paths, and some of them involve college and some of them don't. And one is not better than the other. It's, what do you prefer? Let's think about that. Let's talk about it. I love the book that was published a few years ago called, well, now a decade ago, shop class as soul craft.
Oh,
And just
really?
the idea that, construction trades, electrical individuals who are, electricians, plumbers, others who just have manual trades and skills that the rest of us don't have. That's not something that should be, denigrated in any way, because we all need it. I always joke, I can read the manual, but I can't fix my car. That's
Yes.
the thing. It's not. This isn't about how well you read. It's about whether you can fix cars. And if you're really good at that, where do you learn that you're really good at that? And where do you start valuing that about yourself until you leave high school? Because up until the end of high school, it's all about the reading, writing, and the math that you're not doing very well. And for some people, we do not give them any path to dignity before they graduate from high school. In fact, we just communicate them. There's winners and there's losers. You're a loser because you're not on the path we think you should be on. And I think that's a major problem. We really, and it doesn't mean you don't have good executive functions either. It's really it's a values issue. What do you value? And education has trumped work.
Yeah.
And I think we need to return dignity to work.
I love
no
that.
matter what you do.
McCarthy Genius Grant winner Will Allen. I don't know if you know his foundation.
I'm not familiar with his work.
Oh my God, you're going to love it. He's got a nonprofit called Growing Power, and he has such an interesting story of growing up on a tiny farm, I think in Pennsylvania, if I'm correct. And he said, since age 5, I was hauling chopped wood. And then when I was a teenager, I was like digging and sowing seeds and single seed becoming a tree. I watched that, but I was ashamed of it. I was embarrassed by it. And I used to kind of really hate it. So when I left high school, and he was actually, it was so funny because he said that at age 12, for the first time, his older brother got hold of a basketball. He had not even seen a basketball. He had never stepped on a basketball court. So on their farm, they put a little like makeshift basketball hoop and they practiced. And he said, if you missed that shot, the ravine, it was like such a slow grade gradient that it would be going straight to the river. So you had to be really good at that. So they
major response cost.
That's right. And so they both practiced, and then he turned out to be an amazing basketball player, went to college as a basketball star, and then eventually, but what he said, that number one thing that he learned from his experience is to work with his hands. And when he swore he's never going to return to the farm. He's like, I can't stand it. Nobody does it. I'm a loser. I'm doing that. And then suddenly one of the days, one of his teammates said, hey, this weekend, I'm going to work on this little, I have a little, not farm, but even like garden in the backyard. Would you help me planting? And he says, it rekindled my love for planting. And then he, in the urban area, he's kind of in Wisconsin, he's gotten a big farm, and he employs now inner youth to learn farming. And the reason I'm telling you this is, I think, just to your point, that we undervalue skilled workers because we think all workers need to be knowledge workers. That is absolutely a myth. But second thing, if you think about the motor strip, which is right next to prefrontal cortex, entire coordination, your execution in doing comes from having to move your muscles to produce. It's not just thinking, it's producing. If you don't produce, it's not executive function. So to me, I feel not enough training at home happens where how to change a light bulb, how to actually take fix the lid of a trash bin, how to fix the wheel of a bin that's not rolling down or it's like toppled one way. Those are the things that I feel not enough attention is paid and not enough value. We are taking lamps and throwing them away instead of fixing them at home. Mm-hmm. And I just feel that's such a lost cause that, you remember trade school, you probably are old school like I am.
Oh yes.
In the 80s, they got rid of it, which is such a loss. A lot of people I worked with after brain injury, they couldn't do the jobs that they were designed originally, but there was no training to do something else. So it's a profound loss.
It's coming back. Votex are coming back in certain parts of the country, recognizing we have a population that needs jobs. And employment is more important than education. and in that sense of, empowering you to be able to fend for yourself, we need to ensure that people have access to jobs, and there are jobs out there. And I think, in some places, Bucks County, they have an overflow of electricians, right? There's lots because there's so many people. But here in Berks, there's not. And interestingly, in order to get into the Technical Institute here, you need to be a good student. So it's not,
Which is
you need to be academically capable to get into the VOTEC, so that that group of students that's not so academically capable, but really needs employment, is being disenfranchised from that possibility of employment because they're losing the seats in the VOTEC. And I think that's that thinking that's just, it's muddled thinking, right? We really need to figure out how to help all of our students grow and develop some set of skills that's usable. And the earlier, the better. I just love those stories, and I can relate to so much of it. Absolutely. I mean, there's just things and that's those life experiences that we seek out that teach us so much. My first year in high school, I had basically the conglomeration of 7 paper routes. So I did the job of what 7 different paper boys would do, but I had hired 2 people to do it with me. But I had a 1.9 grade average. But a 1.9 grade average.
Really?
So you get, there's just things you focus your attention on. Yes. And things that you'd rather do in ways you'd rather do them. And there's just things you to learn in doing that too. Getting up at 5 a.m. every morning, and doing what you need to do every day of the week, because it was a 7-day, I had Sunday papers as well. And, and managing that whole process was something that taught me a lot. But it's not something I learned in the classroom. It's something that I wanted to learn and know how to do and think about, and how to grow it and how to get it as big as I wanted it to get, because I had a certain number in mind, right, of what I wanted to hit. And so it's just so the things we do, once we become self-determined, the things that we choose to do that sometimes are undervalued by teachers, by parents, that signal to you, this is something you should be encouraging. And help find ways to kind of balance that out. After freshman year, I figured that one out, but then getting more 1.9s. But for a while there, it was just, and there was some other things happening too that I had to deal with that were, that most children didn't have to deal with. And so you realize there's just things that life throws at you, and you look to your parents for assistance, and or to yourself. And if your parents are not thinking that that's something they want to give assistance to, or your teachers or whoever you look to, that can be a real problem for you. Yeah. And it's just that we miss the opportunities to connect and to strengthen self-regulation and frontal lobe functions with individuals when we turn away from the things that they are most interested in. Those are the things they're most connected to.
You say something that just struck a chord with me. I think when I was growing up, in my house, we were 3 siblings, and no matter rain, shine, you may have final exams, it may be first day at school, you may have broken your arm, didn't matter. And that sounds a little bit brutal of my parents, but we were required to set the table, clean the house, do the chores, including mopping, folding clothes. And this is old fashioned. We didn't have a washer or dryer. We would hang the clothes on the clothesline. And in the rain, in the whole monsoon, which is 4 months, you would have to transfer the clothes. You find a glimmer of sunshine, you bring them out, take them in. And I'm telling you this, I used to find it very annoying, because I used to tell my parents that so-and-so Susie Q, this will be, Indian Susie Q, doesn't have to do any of this if she has a final exam. And my father and mother would say, so we don't care. They don't live in our house. So we were required to balance this studentship, which came with like having to study and read, but your life did not wait for you. You were nobody special. You were nothing like spectacularly obliging the family by studying and getting good grades. They would kick your butt if you didn't, but also you were not excused from living life. And I so deeply appreciate that. I find that and this is a hilarious story, you're going to fall out of your chair, but a friend of mine, we recently were talking like last year, And she also grew up in another part of India. And she said to me that when I would be studying, my mother would be putting my shoes on and tying shoelaces. My father would be feeding me from a bowl. This is 12th grader, okay? I'm not talking about like a 2-year-old.
Oh my.
And her brother would be holding her book so she can read. This is to make her most efficient student. I'm like, what? So yes, I think she's very smart and talented, but absolutely that is affecting her parenting, the way she's raising. She's doing the same thing to her kids, that agency that you were talking about. Well, I cannot believe we have yapped and still not managed to finish the lifelong implications. But George, you're just an incredible wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And I am so grateful to be able to banter like this with you. As we close, do you have your two favorite books that you recommend to our listeners? Last time you get amazing recommendations.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we talked about that a little at the beginning. And I was thinking about that. And on my list right now, I just really enjoy the writings of Stanislaus Dehaene.
I love Stanislaus.
And he, consciousness, his Consciousness in the Brain is a great book for reading, but also he just has a new one out called How We Learn. Why brains learn better than any machine for now. And it's a great read on learning in the brain. And so there's a lot of things we talk about here may not be directly referred to as executive functions or executive control. In fact, there's probably a little different perspective on that this Stanislaus Dehaene has, but than I do. But it's a great read. I would recommend that to anyone. And I do think that in these times right now, Joseph Ledoux' book on called Anxious, which came out a few years ago, is a good read. And I've been doing a number of workshops recently on anxiety and stress, especially given the times that we're living in and the way we're living them, and just finding time to understand the emotional system, how it reacts itself, but then also how a cognitive system can be involved in emotions as well, in a positive and negative way. And so you can negatively influence your emotions with your thoughts, or you can positively influence your emotions with your thoughts. And so, taking control of that process of what you're thinking and how you're thinking it, and understanding those connections between the frontal lobes and the amygdala and the hippocampus are really critical, for understanding, how to really take control of emotions and how to deal with them. And also the idea of, self-talk, the things that you say to yourself, and taking control of that, externalizing it and talking to worry. And the deep breathing that you can do that's so critical, and the body relaxation, body scans, just techniques for calming the mind, so that you can strengthen that capacity for executive functions to take over and assist you in that time when you starting to feel anxious and worried and fearful. This is a process that can come under conscious control. And you can get good at regulating it, and you can get good even at turning it in a way that enables you to kind of like take advantage of it and use it as a motivating factor to increase your self-regulation to achieve what you want. So these are two pretty good books, and I just long lists of things to read, and you just gave me two more I got to look into, which is great. I just love getting recommendations for reading. So many over the years I can reflect back on so many things that I've read because someone said to me, "This is a really good book, you should read it." And wow, they were right. So these are two that are really, really good.
Well, I can proudly say I have read 50% of the recommendations. Stanislaus Dehaene is one of my favorite neuroscientists, and the Numbers on the Brain is the only one I have read. I've kind of slipped. I guess I need to catch up and pick up. But
he's got there's 4 now: Reading in the Brain, the Number Sense, Consciousness in the Brain, and now this one, How We Learn. 4 tremendous books, well worth reading if anyone
Fantastic.
To read. Want to get a deeper take on neuroscience related to reading and math, and just how the brain functions. He's got great stuff. Love it.
Well, thank you for tuning in, everyone. Thank you, George, very much. And that's all the time we have to stay tuned for next week's conversation. And do share if you love what you're listening to, and let's collectively make this society better, and let's champion for the development of the prefrontal cortex. So thank you for joining in, and have a fabulous day.
Thanks very much, Isai. It was a pleasure being with you today. I love it. I just love talking with you. And thanks for doing this podcast.
Thank you.
A labor
so
of love,
much.
I'm sure, but
Yes.
I hope that it reaches lots of people, and the ideas spark lots of growth and lots of good things for people.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Full Prefrontal, exposing the mysteries of executive function. To contact your host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive function, visit her website at exqinfiniteknowhow.com. That's www.exqinfiniteknowhow.com. Tune in next week for another informative episode of Full Prefrontal, hosted by the founder of EXQ, Sucheta Kamath.